Right. Does anybody watch European football leagues? Like the Premier League? You do? Okay. European football league. So like English Premier League. Yes.
No.
Yes. Yeah.
I watched it on and on.
I know you
Yeah.
watch it.
I watch it a lot. So I want to talk about a European football league called the Premier League. And
Wait, what did you say?
I want to start today by talking about a European football league in England called the Premier League. And London, who knows where London is? Yeah? Okay. I hope everybody knows where London is. So in London is one of the dream destinations for both professionals and fans who want to go and watch football. And there are six teams that play in the Premier League located in London. And out of those teams, there's a team called Arsenal and there's a team called Tottenham. And both are located in North London. They're neighbors. And as a result, they're local rivals. You can walk from one stadium to the other stadium. And if you go to North London, and if you watch very carefully, people who wear red, nothing but red, but refuse to wear white are Arsenal supporters, and people who wear white and refuse to wear anything red are all Tottenham Hotspur fans. So Tottenham Hotspur's fans hate Arsenal so much that even the Tottenham themed Christmas goods that are being put out there right now, if you go to Tottenham's website, you will not find any red, not even a single blib of red in their shop. Everything is blue or green. And there's a Korean player in Tottenham, and his name is Heung-min Son, he's a captain of the team at the moment, and he bought a Ferrari that only comes in red. But then, as soon as he got it, you know what he did?
Was it the LaFerrari?
Huh?
Was it a LaFerrari?
I don't know which model it was. He painted it black. It doesn't come in black, but he painted it black because people would, it's basically their religion. Football is their religion. So,
Why would you paint it?
Because you don't have to replace the red.
It's cheaper.
Yep.
Yeah, but it was cool.
Yep, so he painted it black, even though the original car only comes in black. Because it wouldn't have been acceptable to the followers of his club for him to play in Tottenham and have anything red on him at any given time except when he's playing for South Korea. The South Korea's colors are red. And there's actually not funny, it's pretty serious, but there's a Korean fan who didn't know this, and he wore the Korean jersey, which is red, and he went to the stadium and he almost got beat up by people because he was wearing red. That was the only reason why he nearly got beat up. So while he's in London, he's not allowed to wear anything red. So now if you end up in North London in the future, just observe people, and if they're wearing white, they're Tottenham fans, and if they're wearing red, they're Arsenal fans. So you can tell which team they are following by looking at what color they have on themselves. And in England, since European football is so popular, they actually have a saying in England. I don't agree with this statement at all. It's just a saying, but it goes to show how popular the sport is in England. They have a saying: you can change a wife, but you can't change your football team. That's an actual quote. And as I said, I do not agree with the statement in any way or form, but it goes to show how dedicated they are to the team that they're following. And I also wonder how dedicated we are to what, or rather who, we follow. I wonder if we're so dedicated to who we follow that to the outsiders, when they look at us, people outside the church, when they look at us, that they'll be able to tell that we are following Jesus Christ just by looking at us. Today's message is all about following, and it's about what and who we follow. But before we dive into the main text, let's have a look at some background information about today's text. As you know, we looked at this couple sermons ago. We looked at Jesus feeding the 5,000. So he had performed miracles in front of these people already. It's not like he didn't show them any signs. It's not like feeding of the 5,000 was the first sign he performed. He had performed many signs before, and because of the miracles and signs that he was performing, he had become very popular. And the people wanted to make him king by force. That's what it says in the verses right before this one. So Jesus withdrew from them and he went into the mountains. And the disciples went ahead of Jesus to the other side of the lake. But on the way, we saw that they were met with a storm. That was what we looked at a couple of sermons ago too, and calming of the storm. So that's when Jesus walked on water and he calmed the storm. And we looked at it when we were going through the signs. And in the morning, the crowd saw that Jesus was no longer on this side of the lake. He went over to the other side. So the crowd went by boat to the place where Jesus was, which was Capernaum. Even though Jesus had presumably come to the other side of the lake in order to get away from the crowds still followed him. And when they found Jesus, the crowd asked him when he had gotten there. And Jesus responded with the first confrontation in verse 6. It says, Jesus answered, "Very truly I tell you, you are looking for me, not because you saw signs I performed, but because you ate the loaves and had your fill." In other words, Jesus is saying, you only follow me not because of my relationship with God, and not because, remember, the signs are supposed to reveal who Jesus is, and the fact that he's a special person who has a special relationship with God, namely that he is in fact God's son. You're not looking for that, but you are following me because you want full stomachs, because I perform all these signs and feed you, because you're materially motivated. So that begs the question, why should we follow Jesus? Jesus tells us the answer in verse 27. Do not work for food that spoils, but for food that endures to eternal life, which the Son of Man will give you. For on him, God the Father has placed his seal of approval. Jesus was teaching that there are two kinds of bread. Material bread that spoils, right? There's an expiration date on that. Even though when you look at, have you guys seen those videos where they take McDonald's burgers and just put it in a Ziploc bag and lock it up for years and it still doesn't go bad? Have you guys seen that video? Anyways, I don't know what chemicals they put into these bread right nowadays, but anyways, the point is that there's bread that spoils and spiritual bread that endures eternally. Has anybody seen their mom or dad looking at the fridge and complaining, or have you complained looking at the fridge saying there's nothing to eat? Anybody heard that before?
Yeah.
My sister used to say that all the time.
Yeah, and how many times has that happened the day when you went shopping? Right? Well, this is exactly what Jesus was trying to portray here. Even though one might work and buy groceries and food with the money that they earned through hard work, in your case, your parents had to work for, there's a time that food will eventually spoil, even if you put it in the fridge. And yes, even if you put it in the freezer, in time, it can spoil. And Jesus says, do not work for food that spoils. Jesus is telling the crowd that no matter how much you work, the food, the material food that you work for, the bread that you provide to your parents provide on your tables by working will one day be gone. It can be gone because you consume it, or it can go in the trash because it's spoiled. And therefore, in the perspective of eternity, it is not important. This is not a call to become lazy or not work so that you don't have to provide food for your family in the future and be complacent. This is about putting priorities in the right place. So what is this thing that we have to put our priorities to? Jesus tells us in the middle of verse 27 that there is food that endures eternally. And he says that the Son of Man, Jesus is referring to himself whenever he says Son of Man, the Son of Man is going to give us this bread. The food that spoils, meaning that the food that we eat physically will eventually spoil. However, unlike the physical food, that the spiritual food that comes from Jesus is something that does not come from our works, but it is given to us by Jesus out of mercy and grace. And how come Jesus can grant us this type of food to us? In verse 27, it tells us, for on him, meaning Jesus, God the Father has placed his seal of approval. And yet the people did not fully understand what he was saying. So in verse 28, people asked, what must we do to the works God requires? This is again taking the idea of working in order to gain salvation. Jesus himself said the food he is talking about will be given to them, right? Given meaning no work is required other than believing in Jesus. And yet they're asking, what work must I do in order to get this salvation? And Jesus tells them once more in verse 29, the work of God is this, to believe in the one that he sent. There's no other work that needs to be done. Of course, the works come later, right? If, for example, if somebody saved your life, right? You'll be thankful to them and you'd want to do something for them, right? So the work is merely a reflection of what God has already done for you. The work cannot get you into heaven. Because if you want to do work in order to get to heaven, who's never made any mistakes in their lives, no regrets, no nothing, and ever since they were born? Nobody, right? But that's what God requires. God requires absolute perfection from your birth till your death. Nobody's able to do that. And so we already are disqualified from getting into heaven by our works. To make this easy to understand, let's say that one of your friends, right? One of your friends in this room decided to come over to your place and stay over at your place for a weekend. So your friend comes over on Friday night, you guys have an amazing dinner, and you stay up late playing games and you talk, all these things. And then the next day, as your friend is leaving, he pulls a $100 note out of his pocket and says, here, 30's for dinner, 40's for lodging, $10 for letting me play your games, and $5 for giving me your time, and the rest is tip. You probably say, please don't give me that. That's weird, right?
When I lost, my friend did give me something, but it was close to my birthday.
Yeah.
My birthday was last. He gave me this really cool black 3D printed jacket.
Yeah, but you're not paying him anything because of lodging, right? So that's the point that I'm trying to get at. But what if your friend responds to you and says, I most certainly do need to pay you this. I'm not a freeloader. What, you don't think $100 is enough? If your friend asks you that question, in this context, even a mention of payment in such a setting will be an insult to your relationship. It's because of your relationship with the person that you let him stay at your place, not because you wanted $40 for dinner and $30 for lodging. But what do we do in our relationship with God? We find ourselves trying to pay for something that God has already given to us so freely. And just like the friend that came over and tried to pay you, it's an insult to the work that Jesus has already done on the cross. The work of God is believing in the one that he sent. Jesus is saying there's no work that needs to be done. Just follow me and just believe in me. And the crowd, even after they had just witnessed Jesus feeding the 5,000, in fact, this crowd was the exact crowd that Jesus fed, the 5,000 people that Jesus fed. And he fed them with what? 5 loaves and 2 fish. And then even after witnessing all of that, they asked Jesus in verse 30 and 31. So they asked him, "What sign will you give that we may see it and believe you?" Are you kidding me? After you just saw him feeding 5,000 people? What will you do? Our ancestor ate the manna that is in the wilderness, as it is written, he gave them bread from heaven to eat. Literally, he brought heaven down and he literally fed them with the bread from heaven. What on earth are people thinking here? What more do they need to see? Well, if we turn to Exodus chapter 16, the very thing that the crowd is quoting, we will find the answer. The Israelites had nothing to eat at this time, so they complained to God. And God told Moses that he will send bread from heaven. And just imagine that this happened to you. You wake up in the morning to find bread just dew. It says that the dew changed into bread. So you just wake up and find bread in the morning on the floor as if it was growing there. You probably ask, what is that? And this is what the Israelites did. And because of this incident, they ended up naming the bread manna. Anybody know what manna means?
It means health.
No.
That's
Manna
what I
means,
checked.
what is that? It literally translates into what is that. So they kept on asking, what is that? What is that? So they ended up calling, what is that?
Wow.
And so the Jews of Jesus' time believed that they believed in a legend that said that during the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem, Jeremiah had taken some of the manna that was preserved and he had hidden it, and when the Messiah came, he would provide them with the manna that was hidden away. So the crowd was saying to Jesus, "Hey Jesus, you did an amazing miracle today. Good job." Actually, yesterday. Now we want to see the real big one. Bread from heaven every single day. That's what we want to see. But let's be honest, don't we ask our God for very similar things? We forget what God has already done in our lives, and we often ask God to give us signs, don't we? Well, if you don't, then I guess you have better faith than I do, because I sometimes, and more often than not, forget what God has already done in my life and proceed to ask God for more signs. Job chapter 27 verse 3 tells us that the very air we breathe are the breath of God in our nostrils. The very fact that we're alive and breathing is a miracle. And during the beginning, especially during the beginning times of the pandemic, it showed us that in the worst cases of the coronavirus, people could not breathe without ventilators. Our very ability to exist is a gift from God. Jesus saw that the crowd needed some correction. So he said in verse 32 and 33, Jesus said to them, "Very truly I tell you, it is not Moses who gave you the bread from heaven, but it is my Father who gives you the true bread from heaven. For the bread of God is the bread that comes down from heaven and gives life to the world." And of course, he's talking about spiritual bread. So the crowd seemed to think that it was a person, namely Moses, that gave the Israelites the physical bread as well, and then they had followed Moses. But in fact, in verse 34, we can see that their ignorance did not necessarily have bad intentions behind them. They just had a very bad understanding. It says that the crowd responded, "Sir, always give us this bread." So sir is obviously a very highly something that you say to a highly respectable person. And then Jesus finally came to a conclusion that they needed the whole thing spelled out for them. Jesus says, "I am the bread of life." It's me. I am the bread of life. "Whoever comes to me will never go hungry, and whoever believes in me will never be thirsty." No matter what food we eat or what drink we drink, we will soon be hungry and thirsty again. Apart from Jesus, there's nothing that properly satisfies. But on the other hand, Jesus satisfies us spiritually, but he does it in a complete way. Jesus often used metaphors and other examples so that we can easily understand. So he used hunger and thirst as an example. But this is not hunger and thirst that we physically feel and that we physically have. No matter what we do, nothing will ever completely satisfy us spiritually. And it feels like our souls are starving and dehydrated. Just as the most expensive meal will eventually be digested and you will feel hungry again, the most exciting events, the most pleasurable things will eventually come to an end. For those of you who know the band Motley Crue, they said, what? All bad things must come to an end. But this bread of life, Jesus Christ, will completely satisfy our spirits. Isaiah chapter 55 verse 1 to 3 tells us, "Come, all you who are thirsty, come to the waters, and you who have no money, come buy and eat. Come buy wine and milk without money and without cost. Why spend money on what is not bread, and your labor on what does not satisfy? Listen to me, and eat what is good, and you will delight in the richest of fare. Give ear and come to me, listen that you may live. I will make an everlasting covenant with you, my faithful love promised to David." This was a fulfilled prophecy. This event about Jesus feeding the 5,000 and Jesus calling himself the bread of life is a fulfilled prophecy. Jesus was referring to himself as the fulfilled promise that he gave through Isaiah. Verses 36 to 40 tells us, "But as I told you, you have seen me and you still do not believe. And all those the Father gives me will come to me, and whoever comes to me I will never drive away. For I have come down from heaven and do not do my will, but do the will of him who sent me. And this is the will of him who sent me, that I shall lose none of all those who he has given me, but raise them up at the last day. For my Father's will is that everybody who looks to the Son, to Jesus, and believes in him shall have eternal life, and I will raise them up on the last day." This is talking about the resurrection of the body with perfect bodies so that we can live in eternity with Jesus in heaven. So here's the thing. Those who followed signs did not believe even when the signs were presented to them. They did not believe in Jesus even with Jesus right in front of them. Nowadays, some people even deny the very existence of Jesus, but they had Jesus right in front of them, performing signs and declaring the fact that he was the Son of God. But even with Jesus right in front of them, they did not believe. The very fact that those of us who believe in Jesus, is a gift in and of itself. Verse 37 tells us, so here, as verse 37 suggests, so here's a good time to assess ourselves and see who or what we should follow. In our passages, some people were following the signs that Jesus was performing. It seems that others were following Jesus to get some free food, freeloaders. We know the answer, and the answer is that we should follow Jesus. But let's be honest with ourselves, real honest with ourselves. Do we follow Jesus, or are we following the benefits that come with Jesus and following Jesus, just like the crowd? And when we turn past our main text and go to extended text from verse 60 to 71, we see that many disciples were offended at what Jesus said and they left Jesus. Sounds like a lot of us today. And in verse 67, Jesus asks the 12 disciples, You do not want to leave too, do you? Or in another version, my favorite version, which is ESV, it says, do you want to go away as well? So we are also left with the choice. We ask ourselves whether we are following Jesus because Jesus is the bread of life, or whether we're following not Jesus, but the benefits that come with Jesus. And we need to decide. We as humans have a selfish tendency. We all do. I do too. And even the most faithful person can sometimes fall into the trap of following the benefits of following Jesus. So now that we have heard this, we all need to ask ourselves, are we going to decide to follow Jesus, who is the bread of life, or am I going to keep on following the benefits of following Jesus? I hope that our response is the same as that of Simon Peter in verse 68 and 69, which is past our main text. It says, Simon Peter answered him, Lord, to whom shall we go? You have the words of eternal life. We have come to believe and to know that you are the Holy One of God. Do I really know that Jesus Christ is the Holy One of God? Do we really believe that He is the bread of life? Do we believe that there's nothing that can satisfy us spiritually in an eternal sense other than Jesus? We need the grace of God to allow us to have faith. Remember, faith is also a gift from God. Even if Jesus gives us to the will, right? He gives us free will to be able to follow Jesus. God doesn't force faith on us. He gives it to you as a gift, and then you can reject it if you want. But we still need to choose that to accept that gift that God gave us, which is to follow Jesus. So, let's bring this message to a close. Jesus is the bread of life. He's the one and the only one that can give us the deep spiritual satisfaction that we all desire. Regardless of whether you believe in the spiritual world or not, there is a spiritual desire that's ingrained into all of us. And this satisfaction, unlike food, drinks, and other things that pleasure us temporarily in life, it is a satisfaction that is complete, perfect, and it is permanent. And to get this bread of, I'm not saying that there won't be struggles after you decide to follow Jesus, but that satisfaction that comes from Jesus is permanent. And to get this bread, there's one thing that we need to do, and that is to believe in the one whom God sent. It is to follow Jesus. We need to make an active decision to follow Him every single day. We should follow Him and avoid the mistake of following the benefits that come with Jesus. I used to go to youth and all those things because my friends would be there, and it was beneficial for me because I had a social life at church, right? That's how I used to be. I'm not saying that y'all are like that, but that's how I used to be. And of course, as we have been discussing in the past couple of sermons, it is as a response to getting this bread of life, we need to follow the law as a response, not because it'll get you into heaven, but because of what God has already done out of the gratitude. Like, for example, if your friend comes to your house and stays at your house, he might give you a little gift, right? That's fine. It's not like, hey, here's $100 for lodging, right? A gift is fine. Imagine like he brings you some like cake or something, and just says, hey, Mr. and Mrs. whoever, here's some cake that I bought. They'd probably appreciate it. It's like that. But that comes after we have received this bread of life, right? It's a response. It's not so that you can get saved. It's that you have been saved already, and so you're thankful, and therefore you respond by keeping the laws of God. From today, let's put our priorities in the right place and pursue and follow the bread of life, which is eternal, who is eternal, rather than the things of this world that will be gone one day and will spoil over time.